Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto becomes the new Master of Female Alucard, and she gleefully obeys him, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Seeker Pendragon, link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. Alucard, do not close your eyes. That's an order. Integra Helsing, the head of the Helsing organization, and the master of the most powerful vampire to walk the earth. Alucard, the no-life king, also known as Dracula. Integra wore a dark green suit, her platinum blonde hair was long, 2 bangs framing her face, and stopping just below her chest. Her blue eyes shined with desperation, and a silent fury. Beside her, a woman named Sarah's Victoria watched on with a worried expression. She had long blonde hair tied into a spiky ponytail, she had crimson-red eyes that shone with determination, and slight sadness. She wore the female version of the Helsing family's uniform. Both were watching on a screen projector, as a man with long black hair was looking off into the rising sunrise, his crimson-red eyes watching the sunrise with longing and slight exhaustion. He wore an entirely black attire, though they seemed to resemble a straight jacket. Behind the 2 women was a man dressed entirely in white. He had blonde hair that was slicked back, few bangs slicked just above his left eye. The man's yellow eyes were shining in victory, his lips pulled back into a massive shit-eating grin. Integra Alucard uttered softly, "I am sorry, master, but that order is one I cannot follow." "Alucard," Integra yelled. "Sarah's take care of your master," Alucard softly requested. Sarah sniffed slightly. "Yes, master, of course," she whispered in sorrow. "Goodbye, Integra," Alucard said, smiling softly, as his eyes slowly closed. In front of Alucard, a teenage boy watched on with angry eyes, as Alucard slowly began closing his eyes. "Damn it, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to fight Alucard fair and square," he thought in sadness and rage. Integra watched in sorrow, as her close friend and confidant suddenly disappeared, as if he never existed in the first place. She clenched her fist, and suppressed the tears that were forming within her eyes. Hearing laughter, she turned her head to stare at the major. Her expression turned into one of pure rage and hatred. Her blue eyes glinted murderously, as she slowly stalked towards the laughing man. Darkness was all he felt. He felt nothing, he felt weightless. He had no idea how long he had been in this dark existence of his. All he knew was that he had to solve the problem that started his little resting state. However, just when he finally decided to eliminate the millions of souls that he had stored within him to free him of this nothingness, he was suddenly assaulted with a blinding light. He slowly opened his crimson-red eyes, and he slowly surveyed the area. However, he was only able to see a vast sea of nothing but pure white. "Is this the purgatory?" he thought in slight surprise and anticipation. Feeling a presence behind him, he instantly turned around, only to come face to face with a demonic visage. White robes, long spiked white hair, a purple mask that seemed to be eternally grinning. A knife was held in its mouth, showing off yellow fanged teeth, eyes that were entirely black, with the iris only remaining yellow, and finally small red horns sticking out from its head. Alucard tilted his head slightly, idly wondering who this being was. "Who are you?" he asked curiously. The being stared at him for several long moments, before he finally answered in a gruff and a deep tone. "I am known simply as the Shinigami to all beings. I am the god of death, and the fairy to guide all souls to their spot in the afterlife." Alucard's eyes widened slightly, before they returned to normal, and suddenly he gave off a loud and booming laugh. "Truly? How curious and wonderful," he bellowed. "I had always wondered what death was like, and now I finally have experienced it. So tell me, what is my spot in the afterlife?" "It's hell, isn't it?" he asked with a full-blown grin. The Shinigami tilted his head slightly. "You are mistaken. You are not dead. You are experiencing a near-death experience. While your body in the living world was destroyed, you are somehow still living on. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that there are millions of souls within you that are still sustaining you," Shinigami explained. Alucard frowned slightly, but his smile returned, as he looked upon the death god. "I see, so tell me what happens now, Shinigami-san? Am I to forever remain here in limbo with only you as company?" he asked, a shit-eating grin on his face. Shinigami hummed slightly. "I am not certain. You were not expected to die until the end of your world, yet here you are. I cannot send you back to your world, seeing as you technically died there, despite you somehow still living on. Although there is always that option," Shinigami mused. Alucard raised an eyebrow. "What option would that be?" he asked in curiosity. Shinigami looked upon him with an unearthly gaze, almost as if he were judging the vampire. "I could use my power and randomly send you off into a different world altogether. However, I would demand compensation for such an action, and I would alter your true form into something else." Alucard blinked once, and he regarded the death god curiously. "Why would you need to alter my appearance?" Shinigami stared at him with an unreadable expression. "By sending you into another world, you are essentially starting a new life. Thus the need to change your form into something else. You would live a new life. There wouldn't be much of a difference. You would still retain your powers, abilities, your souls within you, and your memories. You can choose to live your new life however you wish. You can even choose to live as a servant to another human should you choose to. Alucard looked upon the Shinigami with interest. Though he didn't want to leave his fledgling Ceres and his master Integra alone, he knew that at one point in time he would have to leave Ceres on her own. He couldn't keep watch over her constantly. He wanted her to make her own choices and to become independent, something that would not happen if he watched over her constantly. As for Integra, he knew that one day he would either be resealed or that his master would perish of old age. It tore at his immortal and blackened heart, but he had no choice but to accept it. Besides, both Ceres and Integra were strong, their will and their resolve made from steel. He believed in them. He knew they would finish the fight with Millennium. He turned his gaze upon the god of death, and he spoke. Before I give you my answer, I'm curious. What would the compensation be, and wouldn't Kami have a problem with this? To answer your first question, my compensation is simple. I want 20,000 of the souls that you have consumed. Why would you want only 20,000? Most of the souls that you have consumed are those who have committed various sins and heinous crimes during their lives. However, you have also consumed various innocents, as well. With my eyes I can tell apart the innocent souls, along with the corrupt souls within you. 20,000 innocent souls are within you. That is my compensation. Allow me to take those 20,000 souls. Alucard smirked slightly in amusement and slight surprise. Really? 20,000 innocent souls live within me? Didn't know that. I just assumed they were nobodies. I guess there is such a thing as being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The No-Life King mused. Very well then, I'll let you take those souls, not like I have another 3 million in there or something. Shinigami nodded in thanks, and continued, as for your second question, do not worry about my brother Kami. I am his brother. I am certain I can convince him to agree to this. If I can't, I'll just get Yami's assistance. Alucard nodded slightly, and the No-Life King grinned in anticipation. So when are we getting started? Right now. But first my compensation. With that said, Shinigami dug his hand into Alucard's chest, surprising the No-Life King immensely, as he let out a small grunt of surprise. The feeling of the Shinigami's cold hand digging into his very soul was strange and painful. However, he could deal with the pain. He endured being shot to shreds and then reforming just afterwards. If he can endure this, then he was just like those weak and pathetic vampires from his world. Seconds later, the Shinigami pulled out hundreds of small blue orbs that hovered just above his hand. Shinigami clenched his fist, and when he opened them again, the blue orbs were gone. The compensation has been taken, and now, it's time to alter your form. Which form would you prefer? The death god asked. Alucard shrugged. Form does not matter to me. I do not care what form I take, so long as I'm at least familiar with it, then I'm fine with it. Very well, Shinigami uttered. Suddenly, Alucard felt his entire form shifting and changing without his command. Soon, he felt himself getting smaller, her hair growing longer, as well. He felt his entire body changing into something familiar, and changing into a form that he had only changed into just recently in order to fuck with Walter. The Shinigami conjured up a mirror in his hand, and handed it to Alucard. Alucard took the mirror, and he was not surprised to see his female form. The 14-year-old visage stared back at her, long silky black hair with bangs covering her forehead. Scarlet-red feminine eyes stared back at her. The white outfit she usually wore when taking this form was on, and of course a white hat sitting atop her head. My girl form? Alucard said. However, she was surprised. Instead of the male voice she usually kept when in his girl form, instead it was replaced with a soft, melodious tone. Her new voice was strange, but she was certain she could make it a bit more sinister. After all, she was Alucard, the No-Life Key Queen. You did say a form you were familiar with, so I ended up choosing a form that you used just recently. One more thing. Shinigami placed a finger on Alucard's hand, and suddenly, the seal that bound her to the Helsing family that was on her gloves disappeared. Following that, Shinigami then dug his hand into Alucard's form once more, and pulled out a very familiar form. Oh! In the Shinigami's hand was now the very cause of why Alucard was in limbo. Blonde hair stopping at his mid-neck, black cat ears atop his head, purple eyes shining nervously, and a sheepish chuckle escaped as the person smiled nervously. Oh, it's you, what's your name again? A deadpan tone entering her voice. It's Schrodinger, Schrodinger said with a twitch in his eye. I'll just call you Dinger, Alucard said, a large smirk on her features as her fangs glinted. Her scarlet eyes glinted with bloodlust. Schrodinger gulped. Schrodinger, you are going to be suspending quite a bit of time with Yami. I do not pity you. With that said, Shinigami opened a portal, and tossed the cat boy into the portal. The only thing Alucard could catch a glimpse was darkness, and were those black flames. Now then, as per our agreement, I shall now send you randomly into another world. Are you prepared? Shinigami asked, making Alucard grin in anticipation. One last thing. Shinigami waved a hand over Alucard's head, and suddenly the no-life queen was assaulted with images and the knowledge of how to create a servant seal, similar to the one the Helsing family used to make her serve them. Why would you give me this knowledge? Alucard asked, shaking her head to rid herself of the cobwebs. You forget that I told you. You can choose to become a servant to someone else should you choose to. The knowledge is merely there should you really choose that course of action. Now then, Shinigami held out his palm, and a green portal opened above his palm. The portal slowly hovered off his hand, and onto the floor in front of Alucard. Simply jump into the portal, and you shall be taken across time and space, across many different planes of existence, and many different realities. Alucard grinned, and she eagerly began walking towards the portal. She turned her head towards the Shinigami, and she flashed him a fanged grin. Pleasure doing business with you, Shinigami-san, she said, giving a small mocking bow, before she jumped into the portal, her laughter echoing. I do not pity the world that she has gone into, Shinigami uttered. One of the main reasons why he had let the vampire leave into a new world was simple. The afterlife was not ready for that psychopath. After what felt like a lifetime, Alucard finally exited the portal, and the first thing she did was stare up at the night sky, the full moon hanging in the starry sky. Alucard grinned, showing off her shining fangs. What a wonderful night. A wonderful night for a drink, she said with a sinister giggle, her scarlet eyes glinting with bloodthirst. She sniffed the air, seeing if she could catch the scent of any living being. And she did. She was able to catch the scent of a vast number of humans deeper into the forest, and an even larger number of humans a bit further away. Perhaps they are currently partaking in war? She mused. However, she perked up when she caught the scent of blood. Fresh blood. Her scarlet red eyes instantly zoomed in on a puddle of crimson liquid. She grinned widely as she advanced upon the puddle of blood. She quickly bent down on her knees, and her head leaned over the blood like a predator. Her tongue slowly emerged from her mouth, and she gave long and savoring licks to the puddle of blood. After several licks, she suddenly froze, her scarlet eyes widening in surprise and glee. This blood, it's more delectable than Integris. This is by far the most delicious blood I have ever had the pleasure of drinking. Curious as to who had such delectable and delicious blood, she viewed the memories that the blood would no doubt contain. What she saw made her laugh hysterically, a gleeful undertone in her voice. Her eyes glinted madly with insanity and slight happiness. The memories she saw were that of a young boy, a boy with spiky sun-kissed blonde hair, sapphire blue eyes, and whisker marks on his cheeks. The last memory she had was the boy being chased into this very forest with a large mob following behind him. Through the blood, she was able to also feel the emotions the boy was feeling: fear, desperation, the desire to live, hopelessness. However, the will to never give up or back down despite the situation. She was also able to see deeper into the blonde boy's heart. The boy had compassion and kindness that far exceeded even what she expected. Yet he had also a vast amount of hatred, a hatred that may even one day grow to surpass even hers. A hatred that may, if left unchecked, may destroy the world, and she would be the instrument of the boy's hatred, rage, and wrath. Uzumaki Naruto-e? A strong and fitting name. You will make a splendid master. With that thought, Alucard stood and slowly strolled deeper into the forest, a slight skip in her step, as her grin threatened to split her face in half. Uzumaki Naruto was both angry and terrified at the moment. The recently turned 7-year-old's day had started out quite normally. Wake up in his shitty apartment, wander around the village while ignoring the hateful glares and harsh whispers of the villagers. Then, somewhere in the day, prepare a prank, as payback to some of the more vocal villagers. All in all, it was simply a normal day for him. Of course, while he kept up the mask of a smiling idiot, he was a lot different in terms of personality than what he let the villagers see. While the villagers saw a constantly smiling idiot, he was surprisingly a lot smarter than most people for a 7-year-old. He wasn't as smart as Nara. No one could be as smart as Nara, but he was smart enough to be considered in the league of a genius. And while he may seem to have a happy-go-lucky attitude, he could absolutely with certainty that he hated most of the villagers in Konoha. However, he was not petty. He could handle glares, whispers, and all the insults. Those were nothing. It was the other things that they did that made them hate them. Beating him once in a while, kicking him out of shops, and sometimes defacing his apartment, that made him hate them so much. If he had the power, he would make those who made him suffer so much pay. But he didn't, and there wasn't a way to get stronger because the librarians usually never let him go in the library. The only way for him to get stronger is to join the academy next year. But he would be forced to hide his progress over the years, and continue to be the idiot they thought he was. Another thing was that he knew they would sabotage his grades in the academy to make him seem even worse of an idiot. But while he hated most of the villagers, there were those he did not hate, like the Ichirakus, his somewhat surrogate family, the Sandaime Hokage, his grandfather figure, and finally Inu and Aisan, the Anbu who always protected him when given the chance, and who sometimes bought him stuff to make his living conditions more lively. After wandering around the village until the sun began to set, he quickly began to head back to his apartment, and that was when things took a turn for the worse. As a large mob of villagers had formed, they began to chase him out into the forest. The worst part was that in the mob were some shinobi, and that made getting away even more difficult. He had no choice but to run deeper into the forest in an effort to get away from the mob. He had gotten hit with a kunai in the shoulder, causing his blood to spurt out and land onto the ground below. However, he paid no attention to that, and instead continued running deeper into the forest. Minutes later, he was pelted with several more kunai, each one hitting his legs, causing him to crash onto the floor. He had quickly dragged himself to a tree, and began yanking out the kwani impaled to his legs and shoulder. Of course his injuries began healing shortly after the kunais were removed, and the blonde-haired boy was prepared to shoot up from the ground and continue from his pursuers. That plan was shot down when a foot slammed itself to his chest, keeping him pinned down to the tree he was leaning against. And he felt desperation, fear, and slowly brimming anger, as the mob began to advance upon with the intent of harming him and beating him senseless. And that led to the blonde's current situation at the moment. The mob is currently beating him, while he himself curled into a ball, protecting his torso from being injured. This continued for several minutes before they stopped, and the blonde was able to hear the mob's voices, as they all began to say that it was time to finish what the Yondaime started. Naruto's panic increased, as he noted that they began to pull out bladed weapons, each intended to tear into his skin. However, before they could go through with their intention to maim the blonde, soft and sinister giggles broke through the forest. Truly you dogs amuse me so. You are so weak that you must beat on a child to prove you are strong. How weak and pathetic each of you are. The villagers, unnerved by the voice seeming to come from every direction, all glared in all the directions where they believed the voice was coming from. We do not know who you are, stranger, but that is no child. It's a monster in human skin, one of the villagers roared, with the rest shouting in agreement. Oh, a monster you say? The voice began once again. The villagers all nodded their heads, their cries of the blonde being a monster being heard. Naruto felt whatever hope he had was melted away, as he was sure that whoever was watching now believed him to be a monster. He grit his teeth and prepared to endure, as it was the only thing he could possibly do. However, the forest became eerily silent, as the shadows began to rise and begin to take shape. Everyone watched in fear and shock, as the shadows took the shape of a girl no older than 14. Long black hair flowing down towards her back, bangs covering her forehead, scarlet red eyes that shined with bloodlust. She wore an entirely white suit, a black tie, and an undershirt being worn under. A white hat rested atop her head, and she wore white gloves. The girl was grinning widely, showing off shiny white teeth and fangs. Her eyes were glaring at the mob with murder, and, as if they were the source of all the problems in the world, a desire to kill, maim, and torture the people in front of her. You call this boy a monster, she softly began, her voice sending shivers down their spines. But there is only one monster I see here. At this point, her eyes gleamed with insanity. That monster is me. With gleeful and maddening laugh, the girl lunged, her teeth sinking into the neck of a villager, and with a champ, the head was severed from its body. The villagers screamed in horror and terror. The few shinobi in the mob took their kunais and pelted the girl with deadly precision. Alucard merely grinned, as the kunai all impaled her body, and she did to stop them. Finally, the shinobi stopped, and the villagers felt relief when they saw the girl's body on the forest floor, pelted with kunai and various injuries. Naruto looked upon the scene with shock and slight foreboding. Why did he get the feeling that it wasn't over? The blonde's question was answered when the body twitched, and blood began rising from the ground, and was absorbed into the body. Before everyone's eyes, all of the injuries the shinobi had inflicted began healing, and soon, the girl was standing, looking at them with her large grin still intact. Dogs can't kill me, she said, her voice echoing across the clearing. Only men can kill monsters. With that said, she lunged, and she was tearing into the villagers, as if it were nothing. Limbs, heads, and organs were thrown all over the clearing, blood splattering everywhere, as the girl showed no mercy in killing all the villagers. In fact, she was laughing gleefully and loudly, as if she was just a child playing in the park. Moments later, everyone in the mob was dead, all but one, and that was a whimpering and cowering civilian who was currently leaning against the tree. Alucard slowly looked at him, her eyes glinting with bloodlust. I said that only men can kill monsters, she began. So what are you? Are you a dog, or are you a man? She asked mockingly, taking slow and taunting steps. The villager brought up his weapon, and small knife and dragged it across his throat, killing himself. Alucard frowned, and she grunted in annoyance. I hate when they puss out like a bitch, she murmured. Her grin slowly returned, and she turned her head towards Naruto. Her grin increased slightly, and she slowly stalked towards her soon-to-be new master. Naruto didn't know what to think, as he watched the girl walk towards him. When he saw her decimate the mob of villagers, instead of fear and horror, he felt satisfaction, as the villagers all died by her hands. When the girl turned towards him, he expected her to look at him the same way she looked at the villagers, but she wasn't. Instead, she was gazing upon him with an almost loving gaze. The girl suddenly got on her knees to reach his level, as he was sitting on the floor, his back against a tree. Her face was close to his own, much too close for his liking. On pure instinct, Naruto grabbed a kunai that was scattered about the floor, and nearly drove it into the girl's neck. However, he stopped himself just in time, the tip of the kunai just barely grazing the girl's neck. If anything, her grin got wider at Naruto's course of action. Hello, she purred, staring at the blonde through half-lidded eyes. Naruto gulped. Hey, he responded questionably. The girl did nothing, almost as if she was content to simply stare at him, and Naruto was already getting tired of her invading his personal space. Why did you help me? Naruto asked slowly, as if he himself still could not believe that someone was helping him. Alucard tilted her head, and she smirked. Why wouldn't I wish to protect my new master? She stated. Naruto froze, and he looked at her with disbelief. Master? He murmured. Alucard nodded her head eager, her long raven locks brushing against the blonde's face. Yes. Well, should you accept to become my new master? If not, I'll just continue hounding you until you do. Why would you want to become my servant? Naruto asked. Alucard's smirk grew. Why wouldn't I want you to be my new master? I've tasted your blood, and it's more delicious than my previous masters. I've seen your memories, and your will is stronger than my previous masters. You are strong in mind, spirit. Your heart is strong as well. You have the perfect qualities to become my master. Why wouldn't I want someone strong to become my master? But in terms of physical power I am weak, Naruto dejectedly said. He felt a hand caress his cheek, and his blue eyes locked with Alucard's scarlet ones. You can be a feeble old man, and I would still choose you as my master. You are already a beautiful creature in my eyes. While physical power does indeed hold much merit, I'd rather focus on the strength that is in your heart, mind, and soul. So I ask again, will you allow me to serve you, master? Will you allow me to be the instrument of your wrath? Naruto stared deeply into her eyes. He saw many things in her eyes: insanity, a disregard for the lives of others except those she held close. He saw the deep-seated hatred in her soul, yet he also detected a fierce loyalty and devotion. Gulping, Naruto made a decision that would change his life forever. What's your name? He asked. My previous masters gave me the name Alucard, was Alucard's instant reply. Should I take you as my servant? Do you promise to never abandon me? To remain by my side until the end? To fight alongside me in every battle? To crush my enemies into nothing but a smear on the ground? To hear my enemies plead for mercy, only to receive none? The blonde asked seriously. Nothing shall please me more, master, Alucard gleefully answered. Then I shall accept you as my servant. Alucard, what are the requirements needed to make this possible? Allow me to handle this, master. With that said, Alucard raised her hands up, and suddenly, the blood on the grass began to rise, and began to swirl around the girl's hands. Soon a circle appeared on the back of the girl's hands. The circle held similar symbols to that of the one she used to have when she served the Helsing, except there was no star in the middle. With a large grin, Alucard turned her eyes towards her new master. All that is left is for me to drink your blood, master. With only a moment of hesitation, Naruto used the same kunai he nearly stabbed Alucard with, and cut himself across his hand. Alucard was quick to grab hold of his hand, and she began to lick the blonde's bleeding hand, making Naruto flush scarlet at her actions. Alucard giggled slightly as her new master's flustered look, and she watched in glee as a swirl appeared in the middle of the circles on the back of her hand. The runes shined brightly before they dulled. With a large grin that threatened to splint her face, she gently took the blonde in her arms circling around the blonde's body, as her head rested atop his. The ceiling is complete, master. I am now under your command. I will follow any order you give to me, and your wrath is now my wrath. Your sorrow is my sorrow. Your hatred is now my hatred. Your enemies are now my enemies. I shall kill thousands, millions, billions in your name, master. All you must do is give the command, Alucard announced, her eyes glinting gleefully. That sounds nice, Naruto murmured, his face being extremely flushed, as Alucard held his form close to her. Soon the day's events finally caught up to him, and he felt exhaustion, as he felt his eyelids drooping. Rest, master. I shall deal with everything until you awaken, Alucard softly spoke in his ear. Heeding her advice, Naruto allowed sleep to overcome him, and he unconsciously snuggled in his new servant's arms. The clearing was silent for several moments, before Alucard slowly began to tremble. Her form was shaking uncontrollably until suddenly, she threw her head back, and laughed loudly. Her mad laughter echoed into the very night itself, scaring away any predators who were attracted by the smell of blood. Her eyes were shining ominously in the night, a scarlet glow that could be seen from miles, her fangs out in the open for all to see, giving off one more bark of laughter, and a fanged smirk. The shadows began rising up, and they quickly surrounded her, and her new masters formed. She held onto her master lovingly, before the shadows consumed them, and they were gone from the clearing. Across the other end of the forest, within the village of Konoha, inside Naruto's apartment bedroom, the shadows rose, and expanded in mass and size. Almost like a tattered cape, the shadows split apart, and revealed the form of Alucard holding her master gently, but firmly. Slowly, Alucard lowered her master on the only bed in the room. She smiled at her master's sleeping visage, before she scowled, as she looked around the apartment around her. Such a disgusting, disgraceful place. My master deserves much more than this, and perhaps I can make this place much more fitting, she thought, although first things first, there are no other occupants living within the apartment complex, thus I can safely assume they left because they did not want to live near my master. The only other person who lives here must be the owner of the building, as I can sense his presence a few floors below. A smirk settled itself on her vampiric visage. She giggled sadistically to herself. Silently, she phased through the ground beneath her, and she continued to phase through the floors until she reached the floor where the owner lived. Quickly, she stalked down the halls, turned a corner, stopped at the door at the end of the hallway, and knocked several times. Moments later, a man in his 30s opened the door. He had shoulder black hair that was matted down against his head. His black eyes expressed annoyance. "What do you want now, demon brat?" The man stopped speaking when he noted that, instead of the blonde brat who lived several above him, in his place stood a girl with long black hair whose outfit consisted entirely of white. Her eyes were red, but much brighter than Yuhikurinai, and they held a more sinister gleam to them. He had no idea who the girl was, but judging from how expensive her outfit looked, she was obviously of noble birth. Thus, his attitude did an entire 180. "How may I assist, Oju-sama?" he asked politely, and in a friendly manner. Alucard fought the urge to scowl at the man in front of her. Having used her telepathic abilities, she was quickly able to detect the obvious dislike towards her master. She wanted to kill him immediately, but she needed him alive for the moment. Once his use was no longer required, maybe her master wouldn't mind if she had a snack. "Yes," Alucard began. "I was hoping we could discuss the ownership of this building," she said. "What do you mean?" the owner asked, confusion in his voice. In response, Alucard lifted her hand, and pressed her finger to the man's head. "You are going to invite me to your room, and you are going to bring me the deed to this apartment complex," she murmured, her eyes shining a sinister bright red. "Yes, of course. Please come in. I shall bring you the deed," the man said hollowly, his eyes blank, as they shined a dull red color. Grinning, Alucard walked through the door, eyes flashing crimson. As a sinister chuckle escaped her lips, she used her telepathic abilities to forcibly close the door behind her. Outside the room, it was silent for several long moments, before a brief sound of pain was heard. A moment later it was silence. The next morning, Naruto awoke, with a groan, as the sunlight shined upon his whiskered face. He opened his eyes, and glared at the sunlight entering his room. He got up, and gave a drawn-out yawn. He scratched his head, and suddenly, the events of last night assaulted his brain. He frantically looked around the room, searching for any evidence that last night had happened. Sadly, he could find nothing. Frowning, the blonde looked at his hand. "Was it all a dream?" he murmured. "Was that girl even real? I can assure you that I am quite real, for if I wasn't, then how could I be standing in front of you?" a soft voice said beside him. Blinking, the blonde turned his head, and his vision was assaulted by red. Blinking rapidly, the blonde leaned back, and he was able to see the girl from last night. Her face being inches away from his, her red eyes being the reason why his vision was blocked by a red color. She was so close that the color of her eyes were the only thing he could really see until he leaned back. The girl remained where she was, not moving from her position, although she did crack the blonde a wide grin. "Alucard?" Naruto asked slowly, as if he still wasn't sure she was real. "Yes, master," was Alucard's immediate reply. Naruto didn't respond immediately. Instead, his mind was focusing on the events of what happened last night, and he blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. "What are you?" he asked bluntly. Let it be known that he was never discreet. "I am a monster master, a vampire," Alucard answered, a sick grin on her face. Naruto blinked. "Vampire?" he asked, bewildered. Alucard eagerly nodded. "Yes," she purred. "Then why aren't you burning in the sunlight? You are standing right in front of it," the blonde 7-year-old asked. And it was true, the girl was standing directly into the sunlight's path. Alucard chuckled slightly at her master's question. I am a special vampire master. I have an immunity to all the weaknesses a normal vampire would have. At best, sunlight is but a minor annoyance to me, she answered, a hint of arrogance in her voice. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her. Prove it, show me your fangs, he asked. He did remember her licking his blood last night, but that didn't mean she was really a vampire. In response, Alucard smiled widely, her lips parting revealing her sharp fangs. Naruto stared wide-eyed at her fangs. He could tell the difference between fake teeth and real ones. For starters, fake teeth were not as bright as real ones when cleaned. Generally, they remained the same color. Also with his nose he was able to pick up on scents that a canine could pick up on. Fake teeth had a rubber-like scent on, or a metal scent, or even the scent of wood depending on the material they were made from. However, Alucard's teeth did not have the scent of any of them. That meant they were honest-to-God fangs, and that meant she was an honest-to-God vampire. You truly are a vampire, Naruto whispered. Alucard nodded, her grin remaining on her face. Naruto slowly raised his arm, and his hand slowly reached out towards Alucard. He stopped for a moment, looking to see if Alucard would object. She didn't. She remained there with the same wide smile, her scarlet eyes staring intently into his. Naruto gulped and placed his hand on Alucard's cheek. It was cold, yet at the same time to him it was comforting. Alucard leaned into the blonde's touch, her eyes closing, as she snuggled into her master's touch. Back when she served Integra, the woman had hardly ever graced her with even a single touch. She savored it. The touch of her master was wonderful to her. Feeling a hand on her chest, she opened her eyes to see her master having his other hand resting on her chest. No heartbeat, she heard him murmur. Feeling mischievous, the no-life queen wrapped her arms around her new master, and she whispered into the blonde's ear, "Why is my new master so frisky and perverted? If you wanted to experience a woman's body, all you had to do was ask the master." Immediately she felt her master's embarrassment, as her master's 7-year-old face turned into an excellent shade of scarlet, his blue eyes quivering cutely. "No! You got it all wrong. I was just curious if you had a heartbeat." Alucard snickered at her master. He was so fun to tease and fluster. She was going to enjoy her time with him. Moments later, a comfortable silence ensued. Alucard was content to hold her master, while Naruto himself enjoyed Alucard's embrace. Despite her body being cold and not having a heartbeat, he enjoyed being held by her. To him, her presence was warm, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. "Alucard," Naruto began, catching her attention. "Last night you said you would never abandon me, that you would remain by my side until the end, that you would stick by me no matter what. Did you mean it?" Alucard smiled genuinely at her master. "I meant every single word, master," she answered, nuzzling her cheek against her master's hair. "After I went to sleep, what else happened last night?" Naruto asked, satisfied with Alucard's answer. "Well, after you heeded my advice and rested, I took you straight home, and proceeded to negotiate with the owner of this apartment complex. Congratulations, by the way, on being the new owner master." "How did you get him to agree to that?" "The guy's an asshole," Naruto interrupted. Alucard grinned. "I have my ways," she answered. Naruto stared. "You killed him, didn't you?" he asked. "Maybe," she immediately answered. Once again Naruto stared before he suddenly shrugged. "Like I said, he was an asshole anyway." Continue. "After that, I summoned my familiars, and began to clean the apartment." "Familiars?" Naruto interrupted once again. In response, Alucard pointed a finger to open the door leading into the hallway. Naruto looked, and he caught sight of a large black dog with multiple eyes walking down the hallway with a trash bag in its mouth. Naruto stared. "I'm not going to ask," he murmured. "After my familiars began cleaning the apartment, I set about looking for a place to sleep, yet nothing suited me, so I decided to sleep next to you until sunrise, master." She meant that too. She looked all over the place that was dark enough, yet nothing really suited her. She looked for something that resembled a coffin, but sadly nothing in the building could be used as a makeshift coffin. She could have built one, but she was too lazy that night to go about doing it. She wished she didn't have to leave behind her coffin before she left this world, but what can you do? Thus, with her options limited, she decided to sleep with her master on the same bed. Besides, she actually enjoyed her master's warmth. Not to mention her little master was quite clingy while he slept. That amused her. "Wait, you slept in the same bed as me?" Naruto exclaimed, his face a beet cherry red. "Yes, master, I also recall you being extremely clingy during the night," Alucard answered. Naruto's flush increased, and the blonde could only look down in embarrassment. Regaining his composure, the blonde took a deep breath. "Was that all you did during the night?" he asked, curious as to what else she did. "That was all, master," she answered. Naruto nodded. "Okay, I should get dressed and prepare breakfast." Alucard tilted her head. "You tidy up, master. I shall prepare breakfast." With that said, she seemed to glide across the room towards the hallway. The door behind her closed, and she continued onward towards the kitchen. Reaching the kitchen, she quickly set about the task of making breakfast for her little master. She was glad she knew how to cook. One of the best things of drinking someone's blood was that not only did you get their memories, but also their skills. She consumed several chefs during her life on Earth. Of course, some of them were innocent and clean of sins, although she believed 2 or 3 committed sins and or heinous crimes, seeing as she can still sense their souls within her. Roughly 40 minutes later, she sensed her master entering the room. By that time, Alucard had already set the table, and a breakfast fit for a king was resting on the table, waiting for her young master to devour it. Entering the room, she noticed her master wearing a white shirt with a red swirl on it, similar to the one she had on her gloves. He also had on a pair of blue shorts. She mentally frowned at his attire. She would have to fix that once he was done with breakfast. Alucard, you didn't need to go this far, Naruto murmured, as he stared at the food before him. One had a plate of 3 sunny side-up eggs, another had a dozen strips of bacon with butter toast next to them, while the last one had a large stack of pancakes. Off to the side was a tall glass of orange juice. My master deserves only the best, was Alucard's immediate reply. Naruto sat down and began eating the breakfast prepared for him. He froze for a split second before he began eating again, his pace a bit faster than before. A minute or two later, the blonde-haired child was drinking the glass of orange juice completely. The other plates are empty except for crumbs. That was amazing, Naruto complimented, wiping his lips. I am pleased you think so, master, Alucard said, giving a small bow, as she gave a pleased smile. Naruto smiled at the vampiric girl, before he frowned slightly. Why didn't you eat anything? He asked. Alucard chuckled. I'm a vampire, master. All I require is blood, she stated. Blood, huh? The spiky-haired blonde murmured. He dug into his pocket and pulled out the kunai he kept from last night. Placing the kunai at the base of his palm, he dug it into his flesh. Biting back a hiss of pain, he removed the kunai and held out his bloodied hand for the scarlet-eyed girl. Alucard's attention was focused directly upon Naruto's bleeding hand. Slowly, she got closer to her master, and gently she took her master's hand. Bringing it to her lips, she allowed her tongue to slide out of its confines, and she began licking the blonde's bloodied hand. The 7-year-old felt himself flush, but kept it down. With the way he lived, he was not as naive as people thought. While his body was still that of a child, and to some extent his mind, as well, generally his mindset was that of a preteen. Having her fill of blood, Alucard stopped and leaned back. Thank you for the meal, master, she said, as she let go of the blonde's hand. Naruto absently nodded, watching as his hand healed. Once it was healed completely, the blonde stood and made his way towards the door, intent on leaving outside the apartment. Because he could take a step further, he felt Alucard's hand on his shoulder. Looking at her with confusion, he decided to hear what she had to say. Master, before you leave, I suggest a change of attire. I will not allow my master to walk in such filthy clothes when you deserve better, she stated. Naruto frowned. These are the only clothes I have, he murmured. Fret not, I shall take care of it, Alucard declared. With a snap of her fingers, the shadow rose up and engulfed Naruto's body, making him yelp in surprise. A moment later the shadows parted, revealing Naruto's new appearance. He had on a white dress shirt. Over that he wore a black suit jacket completed with black pants. He had a crimson tie, and a black hat rested atop his head. Alucard frowned as she looked upon it. No, it doesn't suit your master. With that said, she snapped her hands, and the shadows rose up and covered the blonde's body again. When the shadows parted again, this time the blonde was dressed in an entirely different attire. This time the blonde was dressed in robes. The robes consisted of a light gray long-sleeved hooded shirt with a sleeveless dark brown leather wrapping, trousers, leather calf braces, leather wrap arm bracers, a white sleeveless surcoat, and leather footwear. Jedi adventure robes from Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, Alucard hummed. It's good. Perhaps when you age more, master, perhaps a simple yet elegant yukata shall suffice. With that said, the shadows rose and engulfed the blonde once more. They parted not a second later, and Naruto was shown to be in a crimson-red yukata. A decoration of what seemed to be various yellow swirls resembling whirlpools were etched upon the attire, and they were arranged so elegantly, and in such a manner that Naruto could have been mistaken for a prince, which technically he was. Perfect, Alucard chirped. Naruto stared at her with a deadpan expression. She called this simple? This yukata would probably be worth a small fortune with how regal it looked. Shaking his head, he thanked Alucard for her help, and prepared to leave the room. He stopped, however, and looked at Alucard curiously, as she seemed like she was going to follow him. You're coming with me? Naruto asked. Alucard grinned slightly. Why, of course, master. I'm not going to let you walk around alone in this disgusting village full of worms, she stated. But if anything, they might try to take you away from me. Naruto frowned. They can try to master it, but I do have a method to follow you without anyone ever noticing, she stated. A moment later, her form was slowly merging with Naruto's own shadow, until finally she had completely merged with it. Alucard? Naruto asked, blinking owlishly. Yes, master? Alucard's voice sounded within his head. Naruto looked around for several moments, before he stared at his shadow. You're speaking to me through your mind, aren't you? He thought. Correct, master, was her reply. I see, Naruto thought back. This was useful, extremely so. Not only would she be with him almost constantly, but they could keep in constant contact. Alucard, when we walk around the village, you may hear some of the villagers whisper insults at me, and glare at me. Do not do anything to him. But master dash. No buts. Insults, whispers, and glares are nothing I cannot handle. Insults are just words, and glares are just eyes that gaze upon me. They cannot do any true harm. However, should they try to inflict physical harm, you're free to do as you see fit. Naruto finished sternly. He didn't need to see Alucard to know that she had the most bone-chilling grin set upon her features. Of course, master, she finally replied. Nodding at her reply, Naruto left the apartment building, and proceeded to walk down the streets of Konoha. During his trek, various villagers would glare, and whisper harsh insults to the blonde. The villagers were also surprised by Naruto's clothing, and they quickly assumed that he had stolen them from a noble. Of course, Naruto paid them no mind, content to merely ignore them. However, while Naruto was simply content to ignore them, Alucard was not. At times the blonde shadow would writhe and bristle. At times it seemed as if they were going to lash out and kill the villagers, but they did not. Instead they restrained themselves, albeit barely. The civilians did not notice, but the various shinobi in the crowd did, but they wisely chose to not inquire any further. Instead they chalked it up to a Nara watching over the blonde. Hours later, around noon, Naruto reached the park, and he could only stare in envy, as the kids his age were playing together, including a girl with pale blonde hair, and a girl with pink hair. He looked off to the side, and his envy grew, as he saw the parents of those kids looking on with happy and loving expressions. How he longed for someone to look at him with eyes such as those instead of the usual scornful and hateful ones. It's okay, master, he heard Alucard say through their mental connection. A moment later, he felt arms encircling around him, and he felt his small body being pressed against another. Following that, a soft voice soon whispered in his ear. I am a master here. I am all that you require. Those offspring of the filth you see before you will only drag you down. You reside on a pedestal that they will never attain, master. Such filthy dogs are not worthy to call themselves your friend. Friends are below you, master. Do not bother with such useless things. Naruto stared at the scene for a moment longer, before he looked into Alucard's eyes. One look into her loving eyes, and he knew his answer before his mind could process it. You're right. I don't need any of them. You're all I need. With that said, Naruto briskly turned around, and continued striding the street, not once looking back. Alucard grinned, as she merged with her master's shadow. Before I had a master who could command me to slay dozens without remorse, a fledgling who loved only me. Now I have a master who will love only me, a master who will not be held back by attachments or loyalties to other causes, although the only loyalties he may have will be for the Sandaime Hokage and this Ichiraku family, but his love will belong to me. A master who does not despise me, a master who will not keep me locked away, a master who will love me, and me only. Truly this makes me blissful, Alucard thought, as Naruto's shadow grew a large grin with two eyes staring at his back with love and devotion. Naruto's shadow quickly reverted back to normal, as they began entering a more populated area. No one shall take away my master. He is my master, and only I shall decide who is worthy of him. Those who try to take my master away, and want to be with my master shall have to get through me. Was Alucard possessive, and final thoughts on the matter, as she paid more attention to her master's surroundings. She wanted one of these foolish villagers to try and harm her master. That way, she could leave a bloody smear on the floor. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on who you're asking, a villager did gain the courage to try and attack Naruto in the afternoon. Alucard had quickly advised her master to lead the man into a secluded area, and the blonde-haired boy listened to Alucard's instructions. The villager, unaware of his impending doom, had followed. He had found Naruto waiting deep in the alley, and when he advanced upon the blonde, Naruto's shadow had morphed into Alucard, her crimson eyes flashing malevolently, and lips grinning widely. Her right arm had shifted into a very familiar hellhound, and the villager was promptly devoured. From then on, when Naruto returned to walking down the streets after leaving the secluded alley, there were no other attacks on his person. Now, however, the blonde was in his apartment eating dinner that Alucard had prepared, while the no-life queen herself was tidying up her master's bedroom, fluffing her master's pillow. Alucard observed her handiwork. Perfect, she stated, as she looked upon the sparkly clean room. Seriously, the room was fucking sparkling. Walter, eat your heart out, she grinned, as she imagined Walter's shocked expression. She could imagine the words he would say to her. "You mean to tell me you could have cleaned the estate better than me? If that's the case, why didn't you help at times?" she imagined him saying, to which her response would be, "Meh, I find it amusing watching you fret over cleaning the estate." Too bad she wasn't gonna miss Walter anytime soon. Satisfied with her work, Alucard turned around and prepared to leave her master's room when she saw something that honestly surprised her. In front of her, right next to the door, was her coffin, the very same one she had used since becoming a vampire. She blinked as she noted the sticky note that was on it. Shrugging, she took the note and read it. "Thought you might have wanted this. This wasn't easy to obtain, by the way. Sincerely, Shinigami." She raised an eyebrow at the letter and its details. She shrugged nonchalantly and chalked it up as the Shinigami being unusually generous. She made a mental note to be more suspicious if the Shinigami did her any more favors. She hummed as she tried to think of a good place to put her coffin. Perhaps she could place it in the darkest spot in the apartment. However, a lot of places were dark in the apartment, and she had no idea which one was the darkest. Perhaps her master would know. With her mind set, Alucard quickly set her course towards her master, intent on asking him her question. She arrived just in time to see her master set his plate in the sink. The blonde seemed like he was about to wash it, but Alucard immediately intercepted. "Master, it's not your place to wash the dishes. Please allow me," she said. Naruto frowned at her. "But I always wash my dishes," he lightly complained. Alucard smirked in response. "That's because you did not have anyone to do it for you. I shall take care of your basic needs, and such. There is no need for you to bother yourself with such trivial things," Alucard stated. Naruto frowned once more, but conceded, although he did grumble to himself as he sat on the couch. It didn't take long for Alucard to finish washing the dishes, and she immediately stood behind her master. "May I impose a question, master?" she asked. "You just did, but I suppose I can let you ask a second question," Naruto said, as he took the remote to the T.V and began fiddling with it. Alucard smirked at her master's words. "I was simply wondering where the darkest part of the apartment was," she asked. Naruto hummed slightly. "The darkest part, huh? Come to think of it, there was always this one part of the apartment that was always blocked off. I believe I heard some of the people who used to live say how this building was the former TI department before it was decommissioned. Why was it decommissioned? Something about not having enough cells for future inmates, or whatever. I never bothered learning anything more about it," Naruto said. "I see," Alucard murmured, a grin slowly working its way on her lips. It sounded like the perfect place for her coffin. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, nothing. Just thinking it's the perfect place for my coffin," she answered. "Is it a coffin where you vampires sleep?" Naruto asked, receiving confirmation from Alucard. "I see, so I take it you'll be using your coffin to sleep in from now on," he stated. Alucard could not resist the opportunity to tease her master at that moment. "His master is upset that I will not be sharing his bed with him anymore," she said teasingly. Immediately Naruto blushed scarlet. "No, you got it all wrong. Besides, it was only for one night, and I didn't know you were there at the time. Did not stop you from snuggling me, master." "Shut up," Naruto responded, turning his head away. Alucard giggled at her master, before she placed her hands on his shoulders. "Fret not, master. While I shall reside in my coffin for most nights, that does not mean that I shall neglect you should you wish for me to sleep beside you," she said. Naruto did not answer, preferring to turn on the T.V for late-night shows. Alucard grinned, as she was able to sense the emotions her master had almost masterly hidden. She sensed her master's slight relief at her words. It appears her master wanted to close even at night. How interesting. Despite the fact that she was a monster, her master still wanted her to remain so close to him, even trusting her in his sleep it seems. If things kept going the way they were, he was going to be her favorite master, if he wasn't already. He was already way up there with Integra. "Good night, master," she said, as she turned around and prepared to move her coffin into the blocked-off area of the apartment. "Good night, Alucard," she heard her master respond. She stopped for a split moment. No one had ever wished her a good night before. She grinned widely. Yup, he definitely became her favorite master of all time. She quickly retrieved her coffin and traveled through the very shadows and darkness into the block-off area of the apartment. She easily broke past the weakened ceiling barrier, and her form along with her coffin materialized. She immediately grinned upon her arrival. The space was wide, and various cell doors were opened, with each cell door being rusted, and the bars bent slightly. An ominous mist seemed to reside slightly, and stained blood was on the floor and walls. She could hear soft, distant echoes, seeming to resemble screaming. She grinned, as she realized it was quite literally the echoes of the past. Busted chairs were littered around the area, and various torn and burned books were on the floor. To her it wasn't half bad. A bit of cleaning up would need to be done, not to mention she would have to do something about those echoing voices, as they would no doubt become annoying. Immediately she summoned up her familiars and instructed them to clean the place up. while another half would do something about the echoing screams. Working for the Helsing family, who specialized in vampire hunting, yet they also performed exorcisms despite not being experienced in them. She even watched them perform them, so she knew the basis of exorcising any lingering spirits. Confident that her familiars would clean and exorcise the place properly, she set her coffin in the middle of the room, opened it, and laid inside it. The coffin closing moments later. Her scarlet eyes glowed within the darkness of the coffin, and they slowly shut. She couldn't wait for the next day. Alucard watched with curious eyes as her master prepared for his first day at the academy. Her blonde-haired master was wearing the same type of yukata that she had given him a year ago, only it held a different design this time around. The design that the yukata held this time was that of a vast array of storm clouds all circling and centered around the back of the yukata. The color of the yukata was black with crimson trimmings, with the storm clouds all being a light blue color. They were scattered around on the front of yukata as well, but they were few in number. Speaking of her master, the now 8-year-old boy she had met over a year ago was just finishing up his breakfast at a steady pace. The boy's movements were more refined and slightly more graceful than when she first met him. A whole year had passed by, and Alucard was pleasantly surprised at both her new life and master. Ever since the night they first met, both their lives had been better for it. During the first few weeks with her master, she noted that he pretended to be an idiot among the villagers, and rarely ever showed intelligence to others except those he trusted. Of course, Alucard had asked why her master was pretending to be an imbecile, to which the blonde responded that if the villagers heard of his true form of intelligence, then they would attack him out of the fear that the demon was becoming too strong. Alucard argued that with her protecting him he wouldn't have to worry about attacks on his person, as she would protect him to the end. It took some time, but her master was finally able to break free from his shell and reveal his true self to the other villagers. Since then, attacks on his person became more frequent and bolder. However, the villagers were never able to get within 6 feet of her master, as she had immediately used her power over the darkness to either frighten them off or nearly kill them of heart attacks. When they followed him, she would instruct her master to head into a secluded and dark area so that she may deal with them. There she would emerge and kill them quickly, but brutally as well. She had more fun when a shinobi was in the group. It meant she could play a little more. With all the attacks on his person, Naruto had quickly become quite cold for someone his age. Although he did loosen up within the presence of the Ichiraku family and the Sandaime Hokage, whenever he visited, he was still a bit distant from them. He only ever truly allowed himself to relax in Alucard's presence, and she knew her master trusted her more than anything in the world. Naruto only truly opened up with her, and that made Alucard gleeful that her master trusted her so much. Her master wouldn't be held back from such weak attachments such as friendship, or any of the like. While he could understand the sense of camaraderie, that was the only compromise she was willing to make. It would do wonders for her master to have allies, preferably powerful ones that held much influence, and such. However, attachments such as friendship and whatnot she would not allow. She believed that such things held one back. She would ensure that her master would not hesitate with his decisions, and that he would take command immediately. Attachments such as friendship would make him soft, and that would leave a weakness for both present and future enemies. Besides, the only friend that her master needed was herself. Her master required nothing more. With his cold-like attitude towards everyone, he had gotten quite famous with children his age in the village. Most of the kids saw him as the coolest kid in the village, while some of the girls had quickly gained crushes on the blonde, much to the ire of the civilians. The blonde had even caught the attention of 2 popular girls who went by the name Ino and Sakura. Of course, most of the time the blonde completely ignored them, choosing to never interact with them. Of course, that made their crushes on him to become more prominent. It both amused and annoyed Alucard. Amused her because she knew that if her master had continued the mask of idiocy they would have never paid him any mind, and she was annoyed because they were trying to gain her master's affection. She would not stand for such a thing. She would have preferred to simply kill them, but Naruto had strictly forbidden her to kill anyone unless they were out to physically harm him, or if they were an enemy. While she was forbidden from killing them, her master did not say anything about scaring them. It made her feel a sadistic pleasure of her being, as she remembered the screams they gave off, as she telepathically gave them nightmares. The 2 girls would immediately run to their parents' room, crying about how multiple dogs with multiple eyes were going to eat them. And of course there was the time when she would hide in their closets and frighten them with monstrous whispers. And of course the illusion that their closets were leaking out blood along with a ghoul crawling out of their closet. Their shrieks of terror literally awoke the entire village. Of course, when most people heard of the reason why they were screaming in such terror, they immediately labeled them as having nightmares. Of course, it would be highly suspicious if they kept having nightmares, so Alucard made it a point to give them a nightmare once a month at random times. When her master learned of what she was doing, instead of being disappointed or forbidding her from doing it again, he simply shrugged it off, and said it's not physical damage so it was allowed. Another reason being that before his popularity those two girls had seemed to forget that they instigated many fights with the blonde, and they even encouraged other kids to gang up on him. Now comes the knowledge of her master's growth. Usually the librarians in the library would kick him out as soon as he entered, but with Alucard at his side he never had to worry about such a thing again. She would just either use her hypnosis on them to ensure that her master would always be allowed in, or, if they insulted her master, she would put them in an illusion so terrifying that they would enter cardiac arrest. Of course she couldn't go any further than that, as her master had still forbidden her from killing them. A damn shame. Unfortunately, with the library being for mostly civilians, it did not contain any shinobi material that can be used to help her master gain strength. The only things that were of worth note were books that surprisingly held some combat styles, and a single chakra exercise known as leaf balancing. If Naruto wanted to learn more, he would have to wait until he was in the academy to gain access to the shinobi library. Of course he could only enter the section meant for the academy student. Alucard offered to sneak into the library to get him some material for him to study. Knowing that clan heirs were going to receive special preparation for the academy in the form of their parents, Naruto agreed, and ordered her to gather some basic material meant for genins. Of course he also ordered her to be extra careful. She managed to successfully enter the shinobi library, and she got her master the material he needed. Some basic D-rank jutsu, a chakra control exercise known as tree walking, and 3 C-rank jutsu. These jutsu included were the substitution, basic clones, of which her master cannot do jack shit, and transformation, as the D ranks. The 3 C ranked were fire style, grand fireball, water style, water clones, and wind style, wind palm. With the methods of how to train now achieved, Naruto, along with Alucard's help, quickly set up a training regime. In the morning, at exactly 10:00, the blonde would perform warm-up sessions that usually involved sit-ups, push-ups, and 3 laps around the training field they were using at the time. That would continue until noon. From there, they would have lunch, with Naruto eating either ramen or Alucard's handmade lunches, and the vampire herself drinking his blood. After lunch Naruto would then train on his chakra control, and practice the jutsu that Alucard borrowed. The blonde had already mastered the leaf balancing exercise, although it did take him nearly a year, and now he was working on the tree walking exercise. Surprisingly, it was coming along much better than the leaf balancing exercise. The blonde knew how to perform the jutsu Alucard had obtained quite well. While his skill with the jutsu did not match that of a chunin, the blonde could confidently say that he would perform them better than a genin. Finally, when the sun was setting, Naruto and Alucard would share a small spar in order to let the blonde gain more experience in fights. At first, Alucard was reluctant to fight against her master, as she was sure her master would be very much injured in the process. However, her master later convinced to have small spars with her with an agreement they both made. Alucard would dodge his strikes, and if the blonde managed to hit her, then she would take her turn and attack him while he dodged. It was in a sense a game of tag they created for training purposes. In terms of skill, Naruto was easily a match for a genin, but when faced against the chunin, he would lose hands down. The blonde simply wasn't at that level yet. Naruto was able to gain valuable experience with his spars with Alucard, and Alucard's habits while in a fight passed on to the blonde. Naruto would sometimes pass taunts, and he seemed to gain a sadistic side when fighting, almost similar to hers. He also expressed great anger from someone who couldn't give him a proper fight when he expected better from them. This started when Naruto saved a Hyuga heir from being bullied by a few kids his age. Since the children were bullying a Hyuga who was around his age, he expected them to be able to back up all their bravado, and he promptly confronted them. He insulted them by calling them weaklings, and they attacked him in anger. Moments later, the group were on the ground, groaning in pain, while Naruto was stomping on the leader's head. Anger and disappointment in his eyes, as he said how pathetically weak they were. Of course he had to stop his actions, as another Hyuga had interfered, calling out for the Hyuga girl he had helped. Really though, the girl must not have had a backbone. That much was obvious to him from just looking at her. While he hated people who picked on the weak, he despised people who obviously had some type of training, yet never struck back. That meant she had both a weak resolve, and a much too soft heart. Something that will get you killed in the type of world they lived in. That day Alucard was proud of her master, but she also felt like ripping that very same Hyuga girl to shreds. Ever since that incident with him saving her from those bullies, Alucard noticed the girl stalking her master at various occasions. When she informed her master of this, Naruto merely told her to ignore her, as she was not doing anything harmful. However, should she try anything, then Alucard was able to do with her however she wished. She was very much pleased with her master's decision. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on who you're asking, the Hyuga girl did not do anything other than stalk her master. That disappointed Alucard a bit. That was how the rest of their year together went, training, spending time together, or just lazing around until something interesting happened. Alucard did note one thing however, and that was that her master was very much lenient towards her, unlike her other masters. He also allowed her more freedom, but he could be stern, and very commanding with her, as well. It was a bit refreshing to eat. Her previous masters were either cruel towards her, or barely allowed her any freedom at all. True Integra was lenient towards her, and allowed her occasional freedom from time to time, but that was barely. Another thing to note was that Alucard spent several nights with her master, as well. Sometimes she would stay up with her master late at night watching T.V programs, and the occasional scary movie. They would continue to do so until her master became tired, and fell asleep on her lap, to which Alucard would either carry him off to his bed, or simply allow him to remain where he was, and allow herself to sleep alongside him. That made for some pretty amusing wake-ups the following morning. Alucard also became more defensive, and possessive of her blonde-haired master. If someone so much as even looked like they were going to glare at her master, she would immediately try to fight the urge to completely slaughter them. Even girls her master's age who were beginning to see her master as cute, it took everything she had to not just suddenly appear, and frighten them so much that they would enter cardiac arrest. In her eyes no one was worthy of her master. No one was worthy to set their filthy eyes upon him. No one was even worthy to lick the dirt that her master stepped on. She would completely destroy anyone who thought they were either worthy of her master, or who believed they could harm her master without consequences. Most of the time, during her master's walks through the village, it took every part of Alucard's self-restraint to not tear into the crowds of people glaring at her master. She wanted to maim, slaughter, rip out their organs, to bisect them, to hear their screams of both terror and horror, as she ripped them apart piece by piece, to bathe in their blood, as she slowly killed them in any prolonged and agonizing way possible. Even now she could imagine it. She laughed cruelly and gleefully, as the people of Konoha all screamed, as their limbs were torn apart, their bones making sickening cracks and snaps as they broke, heads being crushed, and pieces of their brains scattering everywhere, their still pumping hearts in her hands, only for her to eat it in front of their dying eyes. She imagined all that, and much, much more. In her eyes her master rested upon a pedestal that was created by the gods themselves, a pedestal that reached and surpassed the heavens easily. In her eyes the villagers were jealous of her master. They knew of his potential, she was sure of it, and they were jealous of it. They wanted the power that he would eventually possess for themselves. She wouldn't let them have him. He was her master. She refused to let them do what they pleased with her master. She was the only person her master needed or required in his life. He needed no more than her. Alucard was shaken from her trip down memory lane by the sound of her master getting up from his spot in the table. She watched her master pick up his plate, and he began washing the dish. That was another thing that her master was adamant about. Her master wanted to join her in her chores around the apartment complex, and such. When she asked why, her master had simply said that he couldn't allow her to undertake the entire burden of keeping the entire place tidy. Thus they quickly came to an agreement. While her familiars would keep the rest of the complex clean, Alucard would handle cooking, mopping, and dusting. Her master would handle washing the dishes, doing the laundry, sweeping, and cleaning both the bathroom and his room. It was nice to know that her master was so responsible at such a young age. Alucard, prepare to head out, Naruto said, as he finished washing his dishes. Alucard grinned, as she walked towards the door. I'm ready when you are a master, she responded, a small sense of anticipation welling up inside her. Moments later, Naruto stepped on the porch, and quickly slipped on his shoes. He gave Alucard a small smile full of fondness, his eyes expressing warmth that was only meant for the monstrous vampire before him. Then let's go to Alucard. I'm curious as to how the academy is, the blonde said, his eyes lighting up slightly with curiosity. Alucard gave her master a smile. I am curious, as well. I wonder if this shinobi academy shall live up to my expectations, she said in response. Then let's get going, Alucard. The sooner we get moving, the sooner our curiosity shall be sated. Naruto spoke, grinning slightly at the thought of attending the academy, and learning the things he could not yet learn. Things such as the history of the shinobi, and old legends. He could have easily had Alucard get some books about such subjects, but ultimately he decided that getting a bit of strength was more important. Now he could focus on both while he attended the academy. Alucard, sensing her master's thoughts, and his excitement, grinned at herself. Her form began merging with her master's shadows, and it wasn't long before she was within her master's shadow. Naruto smiled at his shadow with a fond look, and he soon turned to face the door that led to the outside of his room. Immediately his face shifted into a cold and emotionless visage. His eyes took on an icy cold look that would freeze the flames of hell themselves. With graceful movement of a predator, the blonde opened the door, and left his apartment room, locking the door behind him as he went. He quickly exited the apartment complex and began his trek to the academy. He coldly returned the glares that the many villagers were giving him. The villagers felt shivers run down their spines, and they either quickly looked away from the blonde, or they completely visibly shuddered, and stiffly resumed what they were doing. A scarlet red eye opened from Naruto's shadow, and it glared at the villagers with pure hatred and anger. Quickly the eye disappeared, and the villagers were none the wiser. Yumino Iruka smiled softly, as he quickly organized his files on the students that he will no doubt be teaching until graduation. Truly it's been his goal to become an academy teacher, as he believed in teaching the newer generation of shinobi the things they would require in the world they live in. True that their Jonin sensei would take over the rest, but he could say with pride and great honor that he himself had a hand at preparing them. The brown-haired Chunin was excited, as this was quite honestly his first time teaching, and he hoped that he would be able to live up to his students' expectations. Iruka had brown hair that was held in a spiky ponytail, black eyes, tan skin, and he had a horizontal scar across his nose. He wore the standard Konoha Chunin outfit. Next to him was a man with white hair, with his high bandana that was tied over the top of his head. Like him, he wore the standard Konoha Chunin outfit. This was his best friend, Mizuki. "Are you excited to teach the brats, Iruka?" Mizuki asked with a wry grin on his face. Iruka smiled. "Yeah, I can't wait to meet the kids. To be honest, I'm a bit nervous myself, but I believe I'm up to the task." "What about you, Mizuki?" he asked. Mizuki shrugged at meh. "It really depends," he answered. "So who do we have in our class anyway?" Iruka skimmed over his files, looking at pictures and names of the students he knew he would be in his class. His eyes widened slightly. "Wow, it seems our class comprises mostly clan heirs," he said in surprise. "Really?" Mizuki asked in surprise. Iruka nodded. "Yes, the Hyuga, Inuzuka, Aburame, Akimichi, Nara, Yamanaka, and Uchiha clans have students, and their heirs attending, with the rest being civilians." "Well, I'll be." Mizuki mused. "Looks like we have our work cut out for us. Right, Iruka?" he asked. After several moments of silence, however, Mizuki turned his head towards Iruka, only to see the man looking at a file in his hands with a neutral look in his eyes. "Iruka?" Mizuki spoke. He still did not receive a response. Scowling slightly, Mizuki elbowed Iruka in the ribs, causing the brown-haired teacher to start and look at him in surprise. "What caught your attention so much that you were ignoring me for the past several seconds?" Mizuki asked. Slowly, Iruka frowned. "It's the next student we will be having who caught my attention," he answered. "Really? Who?" Mizuki asked, idly fiddling with a pencil. "Uzumaki Naruto." That single word is enough for the entire classroom to be engulfed in silence. Iruka continued looking at the name in front of him with a neutral expression, while beside him, Mizuki gripped his pencil tightly until it snapped. Mizuki's eyes were glaring into nothing, yet at something at the same time. "The Kyubi brat, huh?" Mizuki murmured, a hint of hatred in his tone. "Yeah," Iruka murmured, not noticing the tone his best friend had. He couldn't believe it. He had heard how the Uzumaki used to be a joyful and cheerful child, always playing pranks and such. However, one day it suddenly just all stopped, and the boy became cold towards everyone. And while he did soften slightly when he was with the Sadame and the Ichiraku family, he heard that the blonde was still distant, even towards them. To be honest, he wasn't sure how to feel about the blonde Jinchuriki. He knew enough about sealing to know that a scroll does not become a kunai when the kunia is sealed. Yet, every time he heard the name Uzumaki Naruto, all he could remember was the visage of the fearsome Kyubi no Kitsune, the massive fox glaring down upon the village, 9 tails destroying everything left, right, and center, the very same creature that killed his parents. He hated the fox, yet he knew that the boy the beast was sealed into wasn't the fox. Yet, he still couldn't help but be cautious. He wouldn't judge the boy, instead he would hold his judgment until he met the boy himself. He wanted to meet Naruto himself before he made his conclusions about him. Nearly an hour later, students began filling into the classroom. Various civilian children, along with clan heirs. Each student goes into the classroom with odd expressions on their faces. Each of them is excited to train and become shinobi. Iruka looked upon all of them with a smile on his face as he looked at them. Truly he was honored to be able to teach them, and he really would have his work cut out for him. As he noted the clan heirs within the room, he frowned slightly, however, as he caught sight of one student in the room. He was sitting in the back, ignoring all the others chatting around him. His spiky blonde hair reached below his shoulders. A low ponytail kept it tied in place, his bangs brushing against his forehead. 2 sets of whisker marks were graced upon his cheeks. Cold blue eyes regarded the room with an icy expression, disinterest, and a lack of concern for what happened around him. A firm scowl set upon his features. It was with a start that Iruka realized that the blonde-haired child sporting the icy look in his eyes was Uzumaki Naruto. Gulping, Iruka continued staring at the blonde. The amount of coldness in the blonde's eyes both shocked and saddened him. A pang of shame and guilt welling up inside him. No child, let alone an 8-year-old should have a look like that. The disinterest and lack of concern for the other in the room let Iruka know another thing about the blonde. If everyone in this room suddenly just died in the most gruesome and painful manner, the blonde-haired boy wouldn't even be fazed by it. At most, he would just blink and shrug it off. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes made contact with his dark brown ones, and Iruka tried not to cringe slightly. If anything, the cold look in his eyes increased, and his scowl intensified. His eyebrows furrowed, as he began to glare icily at the older man. Iruka felt a shiver run down his spine, and his lips went dry. The glare the blonde was giving was enough to make even the Kyuubi itself reconsider testing the blonde. Never before had Iruka seen a child with such a cold look and attitude. Not even Uchiha Itachi was this cold. With his chakra sensing abilities that were a bit higher than a normal sensor by a fair amount, the scarred man was able to get a feel for the boy's chakra. He had a very large amount of chakra, yet it was controlled and tame, something Iruka was not expecting. Also, Iruka noted the warm feeling that his chakra gave off, yet that warmth to it was almost undetectable due to the indifferent and cold feeling his chakra also gave off in stronger amounts. As expected, a very large amount of chakra was centered around the boy's stomach, and it was vile and darker and sinister in nature. It was obviously the Kyuubi. However, Iruka frowned in puzzlement, as he noted something else. There was another strange type of energy surrounding the blonde-haired child. It is far more darker and sinister than the Kyuubi's. It felt wrong, unnatural. If Kyuubi's chakra gave off such a vile and evil feeling, then the energy he felt around the blonde was nothing but pure evil in both nature. It felt truly like a monster, as it seemed to have a kill instinct. Yet, it also seemed to protect the blonde considering how this energy was clinging tightly onto Naruto. What confused Iruka the most, however, was the dead feeling it gave off, almost as if it was dead yet still somehow living. The scared Chunin was not sure how to explain it, but it felt as if it were both dead and alive at the same time. Iruka kept his eyes on the blonde, ignoring the entire class, as Mizuki took it upon himself to begin the roll call. Suddenly, everyone in the room seemingly vanished, leaving only Iruka and Naruto to stare into each other's eyes. Suddenly, before Iruka's very eyes, Naruto's shadow began rising, taking a humanoid shape. Soon, the visage of a girl by the age of 14 was standing behind the blonde, her arms encircled protectively around Naruto's form, her long raven black hair flowing down towards her waist, just below her rear, her bangs covering her forehead, and her scarlet red eyes glaring at him with bloodthirst and murder along with a hint of insanity. Her pupils are cat-like, and seemingly rippling outwards. Her attire was an entirely white business suit with a white hat sitting on her head. Her lips were pulled back into a mocking grin so large that it threatened to split her face. Two very sharp fangs glinted, as her grin grew slightly wider if that was possible. Iruka started. It was the only thing he could do. He felt paralyzed with fear and terror. Those scarlet red eyes glaring through his very being, and then staring into his soul. Flashes of his death went through his head, each one being worse than the last. Like glass shattering, the images stopped, and Iruka held his breath, wondering what was coming next. Subtly, Iruka stopped his chakra, then flared it. Nothing happened. Was this not a genjutsu? Suddenly, Iruka heard Naruto's voice for the first time. The blonde's voice was cold, unfeeling, detached, and most of all merciless. Alucard. It was strange. While his voice was cold and stern, there was a hint of fondness and warmth in it. It was only one word, yet it seemed as if the girl holding the blonde knew what the blonde wanted. Without a word, the girl released the blonde from her hold, and she gave Iruka a grin that screamed of bloodlust and a desire to kill. The girl's lips parted, and she only said 3 words. "You're dog shit." With that said, Iruka watched in morbid fascination, as her arms shifted into a shadow-like substance before suddenly a large black dog with the same eyes as her emerged. The black dog snarled at Iruka, before it suddenly lunged. Iruka suddenly gasped, as he scooted back in his chair, his eyes wide with fear, as they frantically looked around for the dog that suddenly disappeared. "Iruka?" he heard a voice next to him say. Iruka blinked. He turned his head to see his friend Mizuki staring at him with concern along with the rest of the class. They were murmuring among themselves, looking at him with concern, while whispering about how weird he was. His eyes carefully examined the room, and finding nothing out of place, he looked back towards his friend. "I'm fine, just continue on, Mizuki," he said, giving his friend a smile of reassurance. Giving his friend one last look, Mizuki resumed the roll call. Seeing his friend go back to work, Iruka glanced upon Naruto's form. The blonde-haired child was still glaring at him. Iruka noticed the blonde shake his head slightly. Confused, Iruka decided to ignore it and organize his files. He never noticed how his own shadow lowered onto the floor, the top of it losing its sharp point. Academy students of all different classes could be seen all mingling around the academy's yard. All of them are eating lunch, talking with their friends, playing tag, gossiping, and other various things. However, 3 students in particular did not partake in the activities. A boy who had most of his facial features hidden by a scarf he had on that covered the bottom of his face, and black sunglasses that prevented others from seeing the color of his eyes. This was Aburaim Shino, the heir of the Aburaim clan. The brown-haired Aburaim was closely examining a bug that was resting atop his hand, ignoring the other children as he did so. Another had his hair pulled back into a spiky ponytail. He was laying on the grass, his eyes half-lidded, as he gazed upon the various clouds in the sky. Next to him sat a chubby boy who had swirl marks on his cheeks, while atop his head rested a pair of underwear. Moving on. The boy was currently munching on a bag of chips with vigor, and no pause in his consumption. These 2 boys were Akimichi Choji and Nara Shikamaru, the heir of both the Akimichi and Nara clans. Resting his back against the tree, away from everyone else, was Naruto. The blonde was sitting on the grass, his back leaned on the tree while he slowly ate a sandwich in his hand. His stance was both on guard and slightly relaxed. His expression was of cold neutrality, something that made other kids hesitate to approach him. However, even if other kids went to approach him, he would have ignored them anyway, for 2 main reasons. 1, he wouldn't bother wasting his time with them, and 2, he was already busy with someone. But master, I am positive he was thinking negatively about you. I would not stand for it, Alucard once again argued. Naruto sighed lightly. Alucard, he was not doing anything physically harmful. Your argument is invalid. But master dash. Enough. Naruto interrupted. You almost took things a bit too far. I would have let you slide with that illusion you placed over Yumino-san. However, that whole ordeal with you going to stab him in the back was something I would not condone. We agreed that you would only kill those that would physically harm me. I allowed you to torture both Haruno-san and Yamanaka-san with nightmares simply because I trust that you wouldn't take it too far. But you almost took it too far with your actions in the classroom. Alucard was silent for several long moments before she spoke, her tone subdued. Forgive me, master, I shall not let it happen again. Naruto could imagine the type of look that was sporting at the moment. Her eyes looked down, while her lips were pulled down into a small frown. Sighing slightly, Naruto allowed himself to smile slightly once he made sure no one was looking. Forgive me, Alucard. You know that I do not like taking such a stern approach with you, but should the villagers learn of you, they will try to take you away from me. I do not wish to be separated from you. Besides the Hokage and the Ichiraku family, you are my most precious person, and you always will be. It was silent for another few moments, but it was broken when Alucard spoke, her voice full of contentment. I understand, master. Just as I am your most precious person, you too hold a special place within this black heart of mine. I am your monster just as you are my master. Truly, a monster such as me does not deserve someone such as you, as my master. That, and the affection that you display upon me. Naruto closed his eyes, his small smile not leaving, as he leaned his head back. Alucard, in my eyes you will never be the monster you claim to be, he softly murmured aloud. He didn't hear a response, but he knew that his words pleased Alucard greatly. Feeling a hand grip his hand, he opened his eyes, and looked down. He found Alucard's hand emerging from his shadow, her scarlet red eyes looking at him with love and devotion just as she always had done ever since she became his servant. Her hand reacted back in his shadow, and her eyes lingered upon his form before they closed. Naruto continued looking at where Alucard's eyes had been, before he closed his eyes, and laid down on the grass. He sighed in discontent. If only he and Alucard were in a more private setting, then he could bask in her cold, yet warm embrace, as he always enjoyed. His eyes gazed upon the various children his age, all of them laughing happily, and without a care in the world. A year ago, he would have been envious of them. But now he felt nothing, as he gazed upon them. The only people he cared for were the Hokage, the Ichirakus, and Alucard. Even then, it was Alucard who was pretty much a constant in his life. She had always been there for him ever since she became his servant. When his birthday came around, the Ichirakus and the Hokage did give him a few presents, but Alucard, she had made it her personal quest to ensure his 8th birthday was one of his best. She had snuck into various stores around the village, and had gotten very expensive things for him. Things ranging from expensive artworks, to sheets, and blankets, a new T.V set, the newest brand might he add, a few popular movies, and picture frames for him to place pictures in. He had told Alucard that she did not have to get all those things, but she had claimed that her master more than deserved the things she had gotten, saying that if he wanted her to, she would have, somehow, gotten him a mansion to live in. Naruto could only smile, and enjoy his birthday with his most precious person. He had put those picture frames to good use. As well, he had several pictures of him with the Hokage and the Ichiraku family. However, there was one picture he kept with him at all times. Digging into his pocket, he pulled out a silver locket with a gold swirl on it. Giving a small and warm smile, He opened the locket. Inside was a picture of him, smiling brightly at the camera. With her head leaning over his shoulder was Alucard. She was giving a large grin to the camera, showing off her fangs. Her scarlet-red eyes seemed to glow within the lens of the camera. "What are you staring at with such a smile?" a voice suddenly said beside the blonde. Scowling, Naruto closed his locket, and clenched it slightly, as he looked at the person who spoke to him. It was a blonde-haired girl with a clip holding her left bang to her side, while on the right she had a small bang over her right eye. Greenish-blue eyes looked at with curiosity, as she smiled sweetly down at him. Naruto's scowl increased slightly. He knew this person. How could he not? This girl had a crush on him ever since he stopped pretending to be an idiot. This girl's name was Yamanaka Ino, best friend to Harino Sakura, and a contender to his affections. "Nothing that should concern you, Yamanaka-san," Naruto murmured in a monotone. Idly, he heard Alucard growl possessively in the back of his mind. Ino pouted. "Don't be like that, Naruto-kun. I was just trying to speak with you is all," she said. Naruto stared. Did this girl really think she was fooling him? He knew that she was trying to get closer to him, something he would not cooperate with. He didn't need nor wanted to become closer to her, or anyone in general. "Go away," Naruto murmured in his usual monotone, a hint of hostility in his tone. Ino, ignoring her fellow blonde, sat down next to the blonde, and smiled down at him, completely missing the way Naruto's shadow bristled in aggravation. "So, what's in the locket that has you smiling so warmly?" she asked in curiosity, wanting to know what has her crush smiling in such a way. She just had to keep her usual tendencies to a minimum, something she could do since she left Sakura to speak with a couple of other girls. Naruto continued glaring at the blonde-haired girl, making Ino nervous as she suppressed the urge to gulp. "I said, go away," Naruto dangerously said, not bothering to hide his hostile tone. Ino flinched slightly, but continued pressing forward. "Naruto-kun, come on, I just want to be your friend," she whined with a pout, eyes glistening, as she looked at her fellow blonde. She was sure she had him now. Even her father always caved at the current look she was giving. Unfortunately for her, Naruto was not her father. "Alucard," Naruto thought with narrowed eyes upon Ino's pouting form. "Understood, master," Alucard responded, not hiding her glee over the matter. Naruto raised his hand, and opened his palm, as if expecting something to materialize in it, much to Ino's confusion. Suddenly, from Naruto's very shadow emerged a sword. However, it was much different from any sword, and it appeared to be demonic in nature. The demonic weapon had a curved handle, and a serrated edge, a flat guard that was slightly curved with a red line similar to that of a narrowed eye. The blade itself was flat and wide. The blade is a black and gray color, the edge being spiked and curved. Daedric sword from Skyrim. "I said to go away?" Naruto quietly hissed, gripping the demonic sword tightly, as he glared at her. Ino gaped upon the weapon. Where did it come from? How did Naruto get it? Why did it look so damn scary? And finally, it just made Naruto seem so much cooler in her eyes. Ino was having a hard time deciding between squealing or quake in terror. Naruto, seeing Ino's indecision, growled slowly. "Fangirls, he hated them. How can such a thing be considered a female? It is an insult to women everywhere. Master, can I kill this girl? This rabid beast is an even worse monster than I am." Alucard chimed within his mind, disgust evident in her tone, as she growled. The blonde's shadow bristled even more. "No," Naruto immediately responded. "Ah, come on, it's not like anyone is going to miss her," Alucard argued. 1. She is the daughter of Yamanaka Inoichi, the head of the Yamanaka clan, and a member of the torture and interrogation department. 2. She has yet to do any type of physical harm, Naruto explained. Alucard merely grumbled. Mentally shaking his head slightly, Naruto increased the intensity of his glare upon Ino's form, and he allowed his demonic weapon to graze against the grass, the blade cutting the grass effortlessly. "Yamanaka-san, I told you to go away. If you refuse to listen to me this time, I'm afraid you won't like the results." Naruto started with narrowed eyes. Ino gulped, and she laughed nervously, just now realizing that she was probably annoying her fellow blonde more than she intended. But it was okay, she was sure Naruto would forgive her. After all, true love proceeds. Ino opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted when the bell rang, signaling that it was time to return to their classes, something Naruto was thankful for. The blonde allowed his demonic weapon to melt within the shadows, and quickly left Ino, who was attempting to catch up to the boy moments later. Unfortunately for her, she was unable to match the brisk and quick pace that Naruto held. She later lost sight of him when they entered the building. Ino sighed, then pouted. She almost had him. She was sure of it. She just had to try a bit harder next time. But first she had to get to class. It wouldn't do for a clan heir to be late after all. Ichiraku Ramen hummed, as she tapped the notebook within her hand. She was humming a cheerful tune, one that had a few people nearby listening, As the sound brushed past their ears, her humming stopped as she heard someone enter the small ramen stand. Straightening up, she took a small breath and gave a beaming smile to the customer that entered. "Hello, welcome to Ichiraku Ramen. How may I help you?" she asked, eyes closed with her beaming smile. It was silent for a few moments before a monotone voice spoke, one she was all too familiar with. "I'll have my usual Ayam-san." Opening her eyes, her smile got larger as she saw the visage of her surrogate little brother. "Naruto, how was your first day in the academy?" she asked softly, warm dark eyes regarding him with a fond expression. If Alucard could be seen, you would have seen her giving Ayam a dark scowl. "Fine," he curtly replied in a chip tone. Ayam felt a pang of sadness stab in her heart at the blonde's distant attitude. "I see," she said with a sad smile. "My order?" Naruto asked. The brown-haired girl nodded yes, of course. She entered the back of the stand, and moments later she returned with an empty glass cup. "I still don't understand why you always want an empty glass cup," she said as she sat down. Not expecting an answer, she went back into the stand and set about preparing the blonde's usual order. Naruto glanced at her. Before he glanced around, making sure no one could see, he pulled out a kunai and sucked in a breath. The blonde stabbed the kunai into his left hand. Wincing softly, he held his hand over the glass and allowed his blood to pool into the glass. He squeezed his bleeding hand, making more blood drip in the glass. Moments later, the glass was filled, and the blonde watched for a moment as his wound healed. Wiping his hand of blood, the blonde picked up the glass and held it down at seat level. A second later, a white-gloved hand came out of his shadow, took the glass cup from his hand, and sank back down. "Delicious and magnificent, as always, master," Alucard chimed, bliss evident in her tone. "I'm glad for the compliment of Alucard. So tell me, what did you think of the academy?" The blonde asked idly, tapping his fingers, as Ayam placed a bowl of ramen in front of him. The brown-haired girl narrowed her eyes upon seeing the missing glass cup, but Naruto ignored it, as he murmured a small thank you. "I am a little disappointed with it, master. It is a place to teach children how to become shinobi. I expected the learning material to be about killing, espionage, interrogation, survival, and other essentials that you would require on the battlefield. Instead, all you were learning was basic math, history of the village, and other mundane things that you could do in your spare time. Not to mention you already know all those things, master. In summary, I believe it was a waste of time. If it were not mandatory to graduate from the academy to become a shinobi, I would have told you to not go to school at all," Alucard answered. "I agree with your observation. We are supposed to be taught how to become. We are instead taught things that we could just easily read a book to learn about. It's not that difficult to read and learn," Naruto said. "I suggest only attending the academy when it suits your master, perhaps when tests and other things of importance. That way you can keep your grades up even while barely attending the academy. In my opinion, the academy will do more harm than good towards your master," Alucard claimed. "How so?" "Say you do attend the academy every day. Not only would you have to switch your training regime to accommodate for the academy, your time for training would gradually lessen until finally, you are spending too much time with the academy, and not enough time training, as per usual." As a result, Alucard trailed off. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he paused in eating his ramen. "I would lose a good portion of the strength I already have, thus unintentionally weakening myself in the process," he finished. "Preciously, master, the academy is a waste of time. You are much better off on your own, master." Naruto fought the urge to smile in a public setting. "Once again your insight has proven to be invaluable, Alucard." If Alucard could be seen, you would have seen the large grin she had on her face. "I am pleased to be of service, master." Naruto looked towards Ayam, who was currently tapping her notebook, as she stared off into space, her eyes unfocused as she looked at him. He idly wondered what she was thinking, before he dismissed the thought. He returned to his meal, hoping to be finished soon so that he may go home. However, he froze when he heard someone sitting next to him. He glanced towards his right, and instantly he coldly glared at the person sitting next to him. "Hey," Iruka said nervously, a bead of sweat on the back of his neck at Naruto's cold look. Also, why did he get the feeling of impending death? Unseen to Iruka, Naruto's shadow twitched. Ayam, who had finished staring at the blonde, looked at her possible new customer, and smiled politely. "May I take your order?" "I'll have pork ramen, please," Iruka answered his tone politely. Unnoticed by Iruka and Ayam, a glass cup gripped tightly by a white-gloved hand was set upon the counter, before the hand darted back into the shadows. Ayam turned to enter the shop, but paused for a moment, as she stared at the empty glass. That glass suddenly just appeared again, she thought, before she entered the back. Iruka gave the glass a confused look, idly wondering where it came from. He looked at his student sitting across from him, and he gulped, as the blonde's glare never left him, as he slowly finished his meal. The teacher cleared his throat slightly. "About earlier today, Naruto-san," Naruto interrupted. Iruka blinked. "Excuse me?" he asked. You shall refer to me as San, or you shall address me by my surname. Am I clear? Naruto stated frostily, his eyes like glaciers, as he glared at the Chunin. No one was allowed to refer to him with such an affection suffix. didn't use the kun suffix because she knew he didn't like it. Saname referred to him with the kun suffix all the time. Naruto stopped trying to correct the old man after the 500th time he asked him to stop it. As for Ino, she was a fangirl, enough said. There was only one person who Naruto would ever allow to use such a suffix with him, and that person only referred to him as master. I do not use such an affectionate suffix because it would be disrespectful of me, Master, Alucard said. Naruto mentally blinked. He should learn how to keep his surface thoughts private. I would happily teach you how to be a master, Alucard chimed. Right, Naruto-san, Iruka awkwardly said, unknowingly bringing Naruto back into reality much to Alucard's well-hidden annoyance. Anyway, he began wondering about the genjutsu you used on me earlier today. Why couldn't I dispel it? He asked. Naruto snorted, a hint of condensation being heard as he spoke. Do you truly believe I would explain myself to you? I saw the way you looked at me back in class. If there is one thing I despise in this world, it's the look you gave me in class. The same look nearly everyone in this dam gives me. Naruto sneered. A flash of the villagers glaring at him comes to mind. I put you in that genjutsu simply because I wanted those disgusting eyes of yours averted, he coldly said, making Iruka flinch in guilt and shame. I won't explain the genjutsu to you. Figure it out for yourself. With that said, the blonde returned to his ramen intent on finishing it. Mentally, the blonde was trying to calm himself, trying to quell the anger that was still raging within him. Soon he felt Alucard's dark but warm presence fill his mind. Her silent whispers calmed him, as he allowed himself to drown within her voice. The anger he felt brimming within him faded, as Alucard quelled it, as she had always done whenever he was angry or enraged. While she always seemed to encourage his anger, she had always calmed him moments later after one of his anger spouts. He allowed himself to bask slightly in her mental embrace. Others would have found Alucard to be a creature of pure evil, and something that must be cleansed. But Naruto, he didn't mind her darkness. In fact, he loved her dark presence. If going into the light meant leaving her behind, then Naruto would prefer to remain in the darkness with his monstrous vampire. Iruka gave the blonde a strange look, idly wondering why he had his eyes shut. The anger he was able to sense in the blonde was gradually disappearing, as if it were never there to begin with, something that confused Iruka. He continued to watch the blonde silently, watching, as the blonde ate his food quietly and quickly. He heard Iam place a bowl of ramen in front of him, and he murmured a small thank you. He slowly dug in, silently savoring the taste, before going in for another one. He heard a small thud, and he glanced to see Naruto had placed some money on the counter. The blonde gave Iam a small nod, before he left the stand, watched his form sadly, as he did so. It makes me sad seeing him like this, she said suddenly, glancing at Iruka from the corner of her eye. He and I used to be very close. You know, he was so happy and cheerful back then, but now he's so distant. Whatever the villagers say about him is wrong. As a teacher, it should be your job to know your student before judging them. With that said, the brown-haired girl went into the back. Iruka frowned slightly, and he stared at his reflection in the ramen bowl. He thought back to what he had witnessed of the blonde throughout the day. Naruto was cold to everyone, and he never once tried to interact with anyone his own age. In fact, if the boy didn't have such a cold attitude and expression, then he might have seemed lonely. Iruka felt a pang of both sympathy and guilt for the blonde-haired boy. Guilt for judging him too quickly, and sympathy for him to know what it was like to feel lonely. Iruka sighed. He would make it up to the boy somehow. He would show him that there are others who are willing to see him for him. With that thought, Iruka dug into his food, determined to get to know the boy the next day. So what movie are we watching tonight, Master? Alucard idly asked, as she lounged on the couch. Several hours had passed since they returned to the apartment, although they did have a quick tag spar, of which resulted in Alucard's win for the day. Naruto hummed, as he looked at the list of movies that came before him. There were at least a dozen of them before him, but he was having a rather difficult time finding one to watch. Finally one caught his attention. Hey Alucard, what do you think of watching this one? The blonde asked, tossing the film. Alucard caught, and looked at the name of said film. Oh, a horror film featuring a vampire? She asked in amusement. Why not? I'm curious as to what the humans of this place think of vampires in the first place, considering they never met a true one like me before, she stated, a small grin on her face. She always did find it amusing at how often the human imagination of vampires always ran rampant. Naruto shrugged, and he plopped the film in. Moments after it started playing, Naruto quickly took his favorite spot in Alucard's lap, the no-life queen's arms encircling around him automatically, and her head resting atop the spiky mess he called hair. The movie was quite dull in Alucard's opinion, At times she felt insulted with the way the people of this world described vampires as. What type of vampire screamed like a little girl when garlic so much as scraped them? What type of vampire fucking sparkles in the sunlight? By the end of the movie Alucard's eye was twitching rapidly, as she glared at the TV. She took a deep breath, and successfully managed to calm the anger that was welling up within her. She made a mental effort to find the person who made the movie, and to give them a very painful demise, a very slow and agonizing one. She turned her scarlet red eyes towards her master, who was still on her lap, and she smiled genuinely, as she looked upon his sleeping form. She carefully picked up her master, and brought him towards his bedroom. Carefully, she lowered him onto the bed. Next she grabbed a blanket, and lowered down on her master's form, leaving only his head exposed. "Good night, master," she said lovingly. A scowl quickly overtook her features, as she sensed 3 life forces sneaking into the apartment complex, and they are heading up in this floor's direction. With bloodthirsty growl, the no-life queen entered the shadows, and traveled through them. It took only a second to reach where the 3 other people were, and she decided to remain hidden in the shadows, wanting to toy with the 3 soon-to-be dead humans. "Kenji, should we really be doing this?" one of them murmured. "Shut it, Takashi, you want to put the demon in his place, right?" The one whom Alucard assumed was Kenji responded. "Both of you shut up, I just want to teach the demon to not take us so lightly. The way he was walking around the village like he was equal to us, it pisses me off," the third one fiercely said. A dangerous scowl came upon Alucard's features, before her smirk returned. It was time to play. Instantly, the hallway in which the villagers were walking through was engulfed in darkness, so much so that they could barely see a thing except for themselves. "What's going on?" Kenji asked in fear. The man never received an answer, unless you count hundreds of eyes suddenly opening within the darkness and answer. "What?" Takashi murmured, as he stared at the hundreds staring at him, and his friends. "Kenji Jin, please tell me you're seeing this." Kenji, along with Jin, nodded, as they backed up, and looked around in fear, the eyes not once leaving their forms. Soon, a sinister feminine chuckle caught their attention, and they watched, as Alucard emerged from the darkness, her lower body still connecting with the darkness around them. Her scarlet red eyes shined maliciously, and she gave the 3 men a fanged grin. Well, she began. "What's this? 3 little lost dogs who wandered into a kennel to be put down." Her grin grew larger, further frightening the 3 before her. "You 3 have 2 options on how you wish to die. Option 1, slow and painful, and Option 2, very slow and very agonizing. So tell me, dogs, which is it?" she asked menacingly, taking mocking and slow steps. The 3 tried to turn and run, their eyes wide in fright. However, a moment later they fell to the ground screaming in pain that they cradled their stumps where their feet used to be. Looking back, they saw in horror 3 large black dogs with multiple eyes devouring their missing feet. One of the menacing canines finished earlier, and began to savagely fight the other next to it for the feet that it was currently trying to devour. Alucard merely walked past the 3 dogs, idly patting one on the head. As she did so, the dogs ignored her, as she walked by. The 3 villagers tried crawling away from the frightening girl, their instincts of survival kicking in, as they screamed, and crawled away. Jin was the first one to die, as Alucard stomped on his back. Jin screamed in terror, tears of despair trailing down his cheeks before Alucard mercilessly impaled her hand through the man's back. Her hand emerged through the man's body, bones shattering, and breaking, as her hand went through his chest before it emerged out the other side. She removed her hand from his chest, leaving a hand-sized hole in its place. In her heart she held a slowly beating object. She turned to the final 2 men, who were watching in horror, as they saw that she was holding the still beating heart of their friend. With a maddening laugh, Alucard squeezed, and the beating heart was destroyed, blood splattering on her face. The final 2 men screamed in horror and fear, as Alucard began walking towards them. The 2 whimpered, as she stopped, and began licking the blood off her hands and face. Moments later, she began walking towards them again, and the 2 men felt tears streaking down their cheeks, as she got closer and closer to them. The 2 sobbed, as she stopped a foot away from them. The 2 sobbed louder, as from beneath her, centipedes began emerging from her feet. The 2 screamed, as the centipedes began crawling all over them, some tearing into their skin, and entering their bodies. The centipedes inside their skins began to move around, making the experience more painful for them, and they also began to tear into the men's bones, making the men scream louder in pain. The centipedes outside their bodies were merely shedding their skin and muscles, small, but numerous chunks of flesh being eaten off of them, all while Alucard watched on with a sickening grin on her face. "What are you?" Kenji yelled in agonizing pain, while Takashi was screaming beside him. Alucard's grin grew, as she stared at the dying man in glee. "A real fucking vampire," was her response. More centipedes swarmed the 2 men, and moments later the centipedes scattered, leaving only blood stains on the floor. Alucard's hellhounds soon began licking the blood off the floor, while Alucard herself began walking down the hall. She stopped at a window, and her scarlet eyes looked upon the village of Konoha. She glared down up the village with distaste and disgust. She gave off a low growl, before she resumed strolling down the hall. It didn't take her long to reach the newly made door that led towards her lair. She entered, and walked down another series of halls. Gradually the halls began to become more decayed, and darker. She found herself in front of a large double-pair door. She opened them, and entered the large room that served as her lair. The cells are still empty, and rusted. A small amount of mist remains within the room, the screams of the past being rendered silent due to her exorcisms. In the middle was her midnight black coffin. She walked towards her coffin, and opened it with her telekinesis. She entered her coffin, and allowed her eyes to shut, as her coffin closed. With that, she slept, idling wondering what the future would bring for both her, and her precious master. Alucard learns about the Inuzuka clan. Master, who are the Inuzuka clan? Alucard asks, as she looks up from her book in confusion. The book she was reading was about the history of Konoha. Naruto, who was reading a book about chakra, replied without moving his eyes away from his book. The Inuzuka clan is basically a clan of humans who are dog-like in nature. From what I heard, they're becoming more like their canine counterparts with each generation. Alucard imagined an entire clan of humans pretending to be dogs, being walked out on the streets on a leash, while being fed snacks, their tongues rolling out of their mouths like canine, saying woof while being patted on the head, them being told to sit if they wanted a treat. She couldn't help it. She began laughing at such a ludicrous thought. The mere thought of this Inuzuka clan being a dog is like sending her into a fit of hysteria. She held her sides as her laughter continued, her mind coming up with new scenarios of humans being put in dog situations such as doing tricks, and other outrageous things that only a dog could do. If anything, it made her laugh even harder. Minutes later, Alucard's laughter died down while Naruto gave her an odd look. Master, can this Inuzuka clan attract fleas as well? She couldn't help but ask. She expected the answer to be a no, as no matter how hard a human might mimic a dog, there was no way they would get fleas as well. It is confirmed that members in the Inuzuka clan can in fact attract fleas, Naruto answered. Alucard sputtered, as her laughter returned full force. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.